The fourth studio album from the singer-songwriter, guitarist and producer Jamie Alexander Treyas, aka Jamie T, comes 2 years after his last critically acclaimed album, and once again the man continues his stride of creating solid albums. The guy impressed music publications straight out of the gate with his debut being shortlisted for the Mercury Prize for Best Album, and since then he's continued to impress with every passing album. And with this new project, entitled Trick, the guy has maintained his consistency and has released another great record. The album is definitely mired in this state of despondency where seemingly almost all of these songs tend to go down a route of melancholy. Thankfully, it never becomes a whiny, woe is me project that becomes old or petulant at any point. Instead, Jamie manages to deliver a rather mature and engaging set of tracks that are more than enjoyable, well written, and full of raw emotion. Whether these are contrived for the sake of creating an album or they tap into something Jamie holds close to him. On a personal level, tracks such as Sign of the Times sees the guy expressing his disappointment when wandering around the area of London where he grew up and reflects on clubs that are now no longer in existence, places where amateur bands could go and get a gig if they wanted to. Solomon Eagle places Jamie in the position of the doom prophet of the same name, where he witnesses a society that is breaking down, using imagery of a riot to convey the message and scenes of police brutality and rioters causing havoc, and urges people to cease this destructive behaviour or face the wrath of further collapse. Police Tapes reflects Jamie's mood of despondency and disappointment of being lied to, using inspiration from personal events in his life and the recent EU referendum, and the effect that this had on the politicians and people involved on both sides, and how he grows sick of mistruths and misguidance. And Self-Esteem, which paints the picture of a youth who seems to be in a deep-rooted depression, and because of this he wants to cut ties with people in his life. The album also delves into stories of relationship and how all of them came to an end or has left our lead in a state of mourning. Tesco Land comes off as someone recovering from a recent breakup and is seemingly living on memories. Joan of Arc creates this scenario of two former lovers who came from completely different backgrounds and class structures, and despite seemingly no longer being together, our lead reflects on those days as being some of the best he ever had. Dragon Bones centres on regretting letting a love interest go, and the protagonist actively curses himself in the chorus for his own stupidity. And Tinfoil Boy hints heavily towards a woman who is used by her former lover but is still clearly enamoured with this person, despite the implications in the track that the guy in question could be a heroin addict. The album's other tracks that don't conform to any of the previously mentioned themes include Drone Strike, which reads as Jamie reminiscing on starting off playing in seedy, sweaty, booze and drugs fueled nightclubs, and recalls varying incidences that occurred to either him or the clubgoers. Power Over Men comes off as Jamie being infatuated with a woman who, whilst academically she may not have been the brightest bulb in the box, she seems to have this undeniable power over men and being able to make them bend to her will. Robin Hood is about a lad who, when at a young age he wanted to be like the aforementioned character, and ultimately he achieves his ambition, only the song twists this and reveals that he became a bank robber in older life. And lastly, the song Crossfire Love sees Jamie reflecting on some shit that had occurred to him in his personal life, but despite having gone through hardships, he'll continue to harness the love and hatred he receives to propel him forward and fuel his future endeavours. Musically, this album is highly varied, blending genres of indie, rock, British hip-hop, electronic, and even a hint of experimental music is thrown into the blender as well, and what results are many satisfying moments that delivers plenty of variety without trying too hard or becoming annoying too quick. Tinfoil Boy opens on a calm, almost subdued guitar opening before exploding in the chorus, ramping up the volume and harshness of the guitars and throwing in some synth keyboards and sporadic sound effects and a hard bass line. Drone Strikes opens with a militaristic voiceover to link that of the chorus, which has a prominent buzzing synth overhead along with some computerized sound effects, erratic drums and synth strings towards the last quarter. Power Over Men opts for a more controlled soul vibe with funky guitars and backing vocals. The guitar rhythm of Robin Hood is constant and provides a great flow and works well with the drums and is pure enjoyable indie rock. Crossfire Love cements itself as one of this album's more down-tempo tracks, with the guitar taking a softer approach in the verse before adding some distortion in the chorus to create the right amount of contrast. Dragon Bones has a particularly constant sweet bass line throughout, and the inclusion of what I think are hints of bongo drums and staccato synth stabs are highly enjoyable, and Solomon Eagle also gets props with his distorted guitars and synth lines over a simple hip-hop drum beat. There are a few moments that don't always deliver with as much satisfaction as other tracks, if truth be told. Sign of the Times does feel a little underwhelming with a real lack of bass and gusto to really drive the song home. I think Police Tape should have been a more forceful and less washed out track, and Self-Esteem comes off as the calm down moment on the album with the melancholic synth strings, acoustic guitar, piano, and generally an overall turgid sound. But the laboured and at points croaky vocals, the underwritten lyrics, I can't help but feel it's a slightly messy closer and comes off as my least favourite track on the whole project. On the whole, I find myself enjoying this album a great deal. Recently, British hip hop has received a fair amount of backlash and ridicule, but in the hands of the right people, it can work, and whilst only on a handful of tracks, Jamie is more than competent enough to deliver some decent bars and can back it all up with solid instrumentation. I think this album has ambition, it has a good mix of themes, the instrumentation for the majority is very solid and blends many genres together competently, and Jamie executes almost everything with pinpoint precision. Overall, I score this album an 81 out of 100.